Perched above the city on towering pylons, the Shutokō Expressway serves as the gateway to the city for drivers around Tokyo. But at nightfall, the echoes of street racing can be felt on any given evening. It is this specific vibe that developer Genki has long sought to capture with its Shutokō Battle series, also known as Tokyo Xtreme Racer in the West. The idea: you roam the expressway at night, hunting for opponents. You pull up behind them, flash your high beams, and the race begins. Life bars appear along the top of the screen. Whoever keeps the lead wins, their opponent's energy draining to zero. Race, win, earn credits, and upgrade your cars. That's the extreme racing life. And now, after nearly 20 years since the last proper entry, developer Genki and the Shutokō Battle series have managed to come back. This new take on the series returns to the formula it's known for, but with a fresh new coat of paint. While currently only available in early access and only on PC, what's here is remarkably well made and serves as proof positive that Genki has returned, with a lot more coming in the future. So today on this special EX episode of DF Retro, I wanted to take you through a brief tour of the series past. It's a chance to see how the depiction of Tokyo's highway system has evolved over the years, from its humble beginnings through the PlayStation era, Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and beyond. Plus, how does it stack up against real life? All that and more coming up in this episode of DF Retro. As I tackled the twists and turns in TXR 2025, I was overcome with nostalgia, thinking back to that time when I first experienced this series on Sega Dreamcast, circa 9999. I bought the game on a whim after looking for a great racing game and quickly found myself addicted to its gameplay loop. Yet while it was my first experience, I would later discover that the series is rooted in Nintendo's 16-bit Super Famicom, one of Genki's oldest games. Shutokō Battle 94 Drift King and its sequel are Mode 7 style 16-bit racing games released only in Japan. They're not bad, but only loosely hint at where the series might go from here. The concept was more fully realized just a few years later, however, on PlayStation and Saturn, where Shutokō Battle Drift King made its debut. It was here that the series made the journey to full polygon graphics, with both versions focusing on more traditional racing at different times of day. It was released in the US as Tokyo Highway Battle on PlayStation, but was sold on both consoles in the end. I compared the two back in my PlayStation vs. Saturn racing game episode. The gist is that Genki did an amazing job for one of their first multi-platform games. Both versions managed to run at a rock-solid 30 frames per second, and each takes advantage of the unique hardware of the Saturn and PlayStation. The game also features a phenomenal soundtrack and really showcased the potential for this idea of racing around the Shutokō Expressway. Now, during this era, Genki also experimented with other types of racing games, such as Wangan Dead Heat and Kattobi Toon, but it was in 1999 that its racing series seemed to hit it big. At a time when Japanese street racing was becoming increasingly popular both in pop culture and the media, Shutokō Battle arrived at exactly the right time. Up until this era, conventional racing games largely focused on completing laps to win races, the logical choice. By this point, Gran Turismo was already a thing and growing in popularity as well with its rich simulation, but Shutokō Battle, or Tokyo Xtreme Racer on Dreamcast, introduced a very different sort of game design. As I noted during the video's introduction, essentially it comes down to battling, pulling up behind an opponent, flashing your lights, and engaging. These fighting game style life bars appear, with the trailing driver losing life continuously until the life bar is drained completely. Unlike a typical racing game, TXR focuses on missions, taking out crews and individual opponents while earning the cash to upgrade your ride, and also funding new ones. Between individual races, you also have the option to drive freely around the expressway, taking in the scenery. That scenery is of course rather sparse, but the darkness helps conceal this limitation, and it still manages to feel relatively authentic. The elevated highway segments serve as a way to block out the city streets below, making it a good candidate for this era of graphics. Thankfully, this lack of detail is made up with smooth, clean visuals operating at a nearly perfect 60 frames per second. Now, 60 FPS was still relatively uncommon in home racing games at the time, so that alone really helped the game stand out. That plus the high resolution that it output at 640 by 480, another rarity in the console space. The car models, like the environments, are relatively basic, relying heavily on textures rather than geometry, but still gets the job done. Genki did not have the rights to actual cars yet though, so you'll be driving around in unlicensed offshoots based on real vehicles. It was a success for Genki, and it would mark the beginning of a decade-long journey across the freeway and multiple game consoles. Now, this early Dreamcast game was followed up quickly with a rather impressive sequel, Shutokō Battle 2 or Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2. Released in 2000, this new installment massively overhauls the presentation with an entirely new UI, more detailed graphics, and a better campaign. Right away, you'll notice that the cars feature details that were previously absent. Wheels, for instance, are properly modeled rather than just flat textures. The reflection map now rolls smoothly across the body, enhancing the sensation of realism. Textures are higher resolution, lighting is improved, and more. It's still 60 frames per second as well, though traffic can cause the frame rate to dip at times, but it's largely a minor issue. It is, however, very much a successor to that original game on Dreamcast, just a more polished, complete take on the concept. And it's something that would continue a year later when the game was essentially ported to PlayStation 2 as Shutokō Battle 0 or Tokyo Xtreme Racer 0. This one uses an entirely new UI and features plenty of changes, but it is ultimately just a modified version of that second game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, of course, given how good that second game is. What it does allow, however, is our first interesting Dreamcast to PlayStation 2 comparison, where the results were more interesting than I expected. So at first blush, with its sharper image quality and bolder colors, I felt the game looked its best on the Dreamcast. But as you play, I started to make a case for PlayStation 2 as well. It turns out there's a big change to the game's lighting system. Essentially, all the game's street lamps now actually produce light, so as you drive under them, you see how the car is illuminated and casts additional shadows, both of which do not happen on Dreamcast. You can especially see it in areas like this. So right now we have cool white street lamps, right? So of course the white car appears properly white. But as we pull into the area with richer, darker color tones, warmer hues basically, note how the light actually influences the color of the white vehicle on PlayStation 2, whereas on Dreamcast it just stays pure white, despite the fact that the surrounding lights are all putting out yellow light. There's also an extra layer to the reflections now, making it more complex overall. Dreamcast just has that single repeating texture that loops and never changes no matter what's happening around you. PS2 gets this extra gleam across the car surface plus more variable reflections. As such, it kind of feels like a draw. Sometimes the new effects on PS2 are preferable, but other times the more vibrant yet basic presentation on Dreamcast wins me over, especially with its better image quality. Either way, it's an interesting release, but also very much a first-generation PS2 game for Genki. That said, while the tech itself is early, the game is rather refined. Given that it's derived from their work on Dreamcast, it almost feels like a final director's cut sort of release. Many would argue that Zero is in fact the best game in the series. It's well balanced, challenging, yet fair. There's a lot of rivals to take on, plenty of cars and tweaks available, and it just generally feels great to play. In fact, in terms of pure gameplay, I'd argue it was Genki's best work up to this point, and probably the best place to start if you're new to the series. Curiously, the US version, Tokyo Xtreme Racer 0, includes a trailer for The Fast and the Furious, which is fun to think about because at the time of the game's release, nobody had any idea how big this movie franchise would become. Around the same time, however, Genki tackled a different project that's sort of based on this series. So in 2001 and again in 2002, they released a game based on Wangan Midnight, a popular Japanese racing manga. The arcade version, which came out first, is powered by Namco's System 246 arcade hardware, which is effectively just a PlayStation 2. The 2002 release, however, is a home conversion of this game for PlayStation 2. It seems to be powered by the underlying technology behind Tokyo Xtreme Racer 0, and remains somewhat primitive visually compared to what would follow from Genki. Plus, the image quality is still relatively poor, something common during these early days of PlayStation 2. Still, the shift in style and tone is a lot of fun, and fundamentally the game relies on a life bar system very similar to the Shutokō series. But rather than freely roaming the expressway, you tackle opponents in a more linear fashion, one after the other, almost like a series of battles in a role-playing game. This isn't the only time Genki would tackle the series either. There's a 2007 game based on the same IP that released for both PSP and PS3. But really, it's Wangan Midnight Maximum Tune that would become a long-running, very popular series from Bandai Namco itself. A series that persists to this very day in Japanese arcades. It's awesome. Now, after these games, Genki started to make some changes. Firstly, they established an offshoot known as Genki Racing Project, which was basically an internal group dedicated specifically to creating racing games for the company. Its first game was Shutokō Battle Online, a PC-only Japanese online game that takes the concept of the series and, as you might guess from the name, takes it online. Within a month of the online game, Genki Racing Project unleashed a new console game tackling a completely different side of Japanese racing, specifically Toge. Known as Kaido Battle in Japan and Tokyo Xtreme Racer Drift in the US, this new game focuses on mountain racing and the art of the drift, something Genki had dabbled in previously on last generation consoles. Compared to the mainline games though, Kaido Battle has different phases. During the daytime, you earn cash and take part in competitions, while nighttime allows you to take on rivals head-to-head down the mountain pass. If Shutokō Battle is comparable to the Wangan Midnight manga, then Kaido Battle is Initial D. That's basically what they've delivered here. That said, this first game is a little rough around the edge, especially when it comes to steering, but you can see that there's a good game beneath the surface if you're willing to dive in. It's also where we start to see some technical improvements. Headlight effects, reflections, and environment rendering are all a step up from prior PS2 games, something that would become more evident going forward. Yes, I'm talking about the next game in the Shutokō Battle series, Shutokō Battle 01 or Tokyo Xtreme Racer 3. Zero One represents a major leap forward for the series visually, solving all the major issues in Zero and Wangan Midnight. It boasts detailed visuals across the board with beautifully refined effects and tons of content. It also adds 2 additional cities, Osaka and Nagoya, a robust car customization editor, weather effects, proper licensed cars, and one of the most stylish UI designs on PS2. The whole thing just oozes style and polish in a way that the last few games did not. You can tell that Genki was really getting the hang of it. Of course, out of the gate, handling feels a bit squirrely, but stick with it. Things improve as you improve along with your car. Unfortunately, the US version from Crave apparently has some annoying tweaks and bugs that makes the game both more difficult and can lead to crashes. I've only played Zero One myself, so I can't confirm this, but there is a patch available for the US version if you want to play that one. But since this is DF Retro, it's the visuals that caught my interest the most, specifically all the subtle new details added. For starters, the lighting model is the best yet. The shading on the environment and cars is top tier. The reflections from Kaido Battle also make the cut. Rather than just running a texture across the surface, the texture is now captured from a probe of sorts that essentially reflects the real surroundings instead. The sky system is also improved with clouds and a fog system that better ties the environment together. Plus, the lighting itself has improved, giving you the impression that there is a real city below the track now. Coming over from Kaido Battle, the headlights are another huge improvement. Using a combination of real-time lighting and clever textures, they produce convincing headlights that, at a glance, almost look per pixel, something the PS2 cannot do. Remember how it looked in the past? It was just sort of a texture projected directly in front of the car. It never really looked all that great, but that's no longer the case. Car lights also now show approximate specular highlights in the tarmac when viewed from the front. Then there's the tunnel reflections. Look closely here at the walls. Yes, there's a subtle secondary texture layer that sort of parallaxes with the surroundings to give the impression of actual reflections happening around you. Super subtle, but I think it's really neat. Rain also makes its debut, allowing the track to reflect cars and surroundings beautifully, not to mention the raindrop effect on the windscreen when racing in first person. Then there's the textures. There's a very clever little texture trick here that I'm a big fan of. So I like per pixel motion blur in racing games. It enhances the speed of motion, but during the PS2 era, this wasn't actually feasible. Genki, however, instead focused on the textures itself. Essentially, when driving, the grain of the tarmac is designed to give the impression of motion. So the art itself, the actual textures, were created to reflect the speed of the game, and as a result, if you watch the area near the car here in the third-person camera, it almost gives you a similar impression to games that would use per pixel motion blur instead. But it's all just a texture trick. The game looks so good that I decided it was time to bring in some real footage for comparison, where alas, I discovered we still aren't quite there yet. We'll check in later to see how other more modern games in the series compare. Speaking of comparisons, when placed next to the prior entries, I think it becomes easy to appreciate how much nicer 01 looks. It's clear that Genki was finally getting to grips with the PS2, and it stands as one of the best entries in the series as a result. Following a packed few years then, 2004 was relatively quiet for Genki Racing Project. The main release is Kaido Battle 2 Chain Reaction. This is a huge improvement over the original with better handling, visuals, and gameplay flow. Curiously, this one did not see release in the US, but it did come to Europe as Kaido Racer. This is my personal favorite entry in the Kaido Battle series. Definitely give it a look. But back to Shutokō Battle, there was another game released for mobile phones known as Shutokō Battle Evolution. But unfortunately, there is precious little information available to this day, and it's not even clear if anyone has actually managed to preserve the game. It's not even the first mobile entry in the series. Genki Mobile released a whole mess of these things over the course of 10 years or so, and they're all virtually inaccessible today. An example of why preservation efforts are so important, even when the quality of the games in question is low. Now, another game perhaps of a similar quality is Tokyo Xtreme Racer Advance. This one was developed by David A. Palmer Productions rather than Genki. It's a GBA only game that has some rather impressive tech under the hood, but one that ultimately just doesn't play very well. The GBA really isn't designed for 3D after all, but the development team did impressively manage to produce full 3D courses and vehicles. And yeah, it's super cool to see this on the GBA, but due to the low frame rate and low game speed, it just isn't all that much fun to play. And without Genki's involvement, this one also never saw release in Japan. On a more positive note though, Genki did actually manage to release a decent portable version of the series on PSP. Known as Shutokō Battle Zone of Control in Japan and Street Supremacy in the West, this time published by Konami, this is the first mobile attempt that actually manages to bring forth the core DNA of the series. At first blush, there's some interesting things going on too. The UI, for instance, is super clean and stylish with these beautiful transitions between every menu. It really caught my attention. The visuals are also gorgeous. It feels comparable to the console games in many ways, with the limiting factor being the frame rate. It only runs at 30 FPS rather than 60, which is a big step down compared to Ridge Racers from Namco. But still, for 2005, seeing a game that looked properly console quality was super awesome on a portable device. It also feels great to play, so it does seem to have a lot going for it. But unfortunately, there's a big caveat. The gameplay flow was modified for this format and now focuses on picking rivals using a scanner, then just immediately racing them. It's not a horrible idea on paper or for a portable game, but there's loading times between every match that makes it all feel rather segmented. It's a shame really, as there's a lot of potential here, but it doesn't quite make the grade, and I like it less than most of the other games in the series. 2005 also saw the release of the third Kaido Battle game, Touge no Densetsu. This one did actually get a US release as Tokyo Xtreme Racer Drift 2, but honestly it's my least favorite of the three. The game just feels slower and less responsive in a way that I never really got on with. That said, unlike the others, I only discovered this one when making this video and did not spend a great deal of time with it, so there is hope that it could improve in time. I simply wanted to note its existence here to fill in the series' history. This is also the year that Genki fiddled with more traditional circuit racing with Racing Battle C1 Grand Prix. This is a unique fusion between more traditional circuit-style racing and Shutokō Battle style driving, arguably Genki's most ambitious racing game of all time. It features day and night racing, weather conditions, real-world circuits, and highways, along with multiple types of gameplay. It's also beautiful with tons of great visual effects, detailed models and tracks, variable lighting conditions, and all the other technical features that were introduced in 01. Genki really went all out for this one, so it's a shame that it only ever received a Japanese release. Thankfully, in recent times, if you're not familiar with the language, there is actually a fan translation available. I haven't tested it myself, but given all the menus and options, I'm sure this will make it a lot more playable for a wider audience, which is why you should absolutely play this one if you've not had a chance to do so. It's honestly large enough that it could support almost an entire episode by itself, but in the context of this video, I really just wanted to raise awareness. But it's also why 2005 was such an interesting time for Genki, because, well, not everything went according to plan. You had some hidden gems like this, but also some, shall I say, failures. But this brings us to 2006, with Shutokō Battle X. This time, the target is indeed an X, Xbox 360 to be specific. Yes, we've arrived at the HD era of Shutokō Battle. Known as Import Tuner Challenge in the West, this one caught my attention back in the day, but that excitement was slightly tempered by one major thing. The game only runs at 30 frames per second. But before we focus on that detail, let's focus on what the game does well. The jump to Xbox 360 has allowed some major improvements in terms of overall presentation and visual quality. For the first time, you really get the feeling of driving through an actual city space rather than just a floating road with some buildings on the side. The surroundings feel more dense and realistic. The lighting quality is improved again. Texture and model detail is hugely enhanced, and a whole suite of post-processing effects have been added to the mix. The cars in general look excellent, and is a big step up for the series. It also maintains the classic DNA of the Shutō series while bringing in some great new features as well. The parking lot system, for instance, is something that was introduced in Kaido Battle. That makes an appearance here. This sort of becomes a hangout/meeting place for meeting rivals and other friendly faces that will be with you throughout your journey across the Shutō Expressway. It's basically the glue that holds the whole game together, and it makes the progression feel more natural and enjoyable. There's also a robust new customization system that goes even beyond 01, and just generally more of a framework behind the entire game. It's a lot easier to understand how to proceed. The handling is also pretty good right out of the gate. It's an excellent entry all around, in fact. It's just that there's one small detail, the frame rate, that lets the game down a bit. They try to make up for this with some per pixel motion blur, but alas, 30 FPS is just straight up a big step down from the Dreamcast and PS2 games, making it overall feel sluggish compared to them. When we actually compare the two different games, however, the impression is certainly fascinating. There's no doubt that the boosted visual quality is very noticeable here, but that drop in performance keeps it from standing tall above the older games. It's a real shame that they didn't get another shot at making a TXR game on the Xbox 360 or PS3. Unfortunately, this entry feels like it was kind of lost amongst the shuffle of that era, and after its release, the series would slowly fade away. There were the two Wangan Midnight games on PS3 and PSP, of course, and there were additional mobile games released as well, including one for iOS and Android, but really, the series as we knew it was effectively dead. That is, until 2025. In a surprising comeback, Genki Racing Project made its triumphant return in 2025 with the announcement and early access release of Tokyo Xtreme Racer, or just Shutokō Battle. No numbers, no subtitles, it's a return to the beginning, a chance to revisit that original concept which defined the series through a fresh coat of paint. And perhaps most impressively, they managed to pull it off. Yes, even in this early state, TXR 2025 is a triumph. The core of the game remains very much in line with previous entries. Roam the highway, take on opponents, earn money, and expand. But the entire progression system and presentation is better than any prior entry. The new garage screen is super clean and beautifully designed. Everything is built within this centralized menu system that you can now seamlessly switch between. The highway map itself is also more elegant, clearly spelling out where to go and what your next goals might be, and they even brought back the parking lot system again that we saw on Xbox 360. Once in game, I think you'll find the handling is pretty fun and responsive, but arguably a little too simple, even with basic cars. You'll have no problem sliding around turns, and I'm of two minds on this. So people often complained about the handling in these games in the past, specifically reviewers, but learning how to control the car was a good part of that experience as well. In this case, it just feels like a really tight arcade racing game right out of the gate, which is perhaps a good idea in that it should draw in new players as well. But if you were a fan of the more challenging handling in 01/TXR3, you won't find it here. That said, when you get down to it, it's still a lot of fun to play, and that's perhaps what's most critical. It's just a solid arcade racing game. Where you really feel the jump, however, is in the visuals. Now, Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2025 uses Unreal Engine 5 to power its vision, and at first blush, that might have been a cause for concern, given how demanding the requirements for Unreal are and all the various other problems we've reported on for years. Yet the game manages to run exceptionally well, even on lower-end hardware such as the Steam Deck, though obviously it requires some lower settings to get there. The big area where it shines is, of course, the lighting. Surfaces now exhibit varying degrees of reflectivity now. Remember the tunnel reflections I pointed out in 01? Well, that's taken to a whole new level here with beautiful diffuse reflections across the entire surface. It's applied to the roof inside each tunnel as well, creating this perfect fusion of glossy and roughness that really sells the effect. When using the higher settings for lighting and reflections, you can take advantage of Lumen GI and reflections. This means cars reflect on other cars, on themselves, and the environment. Light transfer also occurs thanks to Lumen GI. Like here, notice how the red paint of the car is visible on the other white car, along with the lumen reflection. It's mostly subtle, but it adds that extra hint of realism. Of course, on low and medium settings, the game reverts to SSR for reflections and drops the Lumen GI entirely, which kinda got me thinking. The more advanced features are of course expensive, right? And this is Unreal Engine 5. Yet, against the odds, the game turned out to be surprisingly scalable. In fact, the footage that I'm playing right now is running on the absolute lowest possible settings, if you didn't already notice. Does the game look worse? Yeah, for sure, without question. But I'd say it still looks good enough, and with these settings, even very old and low power GPUs can still push through the game with relative ease. It also means that things like the Steam Deck have zero issues running the game at these settings, or even slightly above. In addition, it's the rare modern game that actually supports FXAA or the option for no AA at all. I'm not a fan of these myself, but I know some folks do appreciate that. Epic's TSR is also present, along with DLSS, and there you can even force the transformer model for improved fidelity. The only real complaint I have with the visual settings is the fact that they're not accessible in-game. You can only modify them from the garage menu. But hey, at least there's no issues with stutter, and the game is very scalable, making it one of the rare Unreal Engine 5 games that can actually be enjoyed on a wide range of PCs. But after spending a lot of time with it, I became more curious to see how it compares with prior games. This gives us a chance to sort of contrast with each generation of the Shuto Expressway circa Shutokō Battle. The upgrade in visual quality is of course obvious, but it really helps demonstrate the evolution of the technology and Genki itself. So like when you look back at the first Dreamcast game, it's pretty clear that it was always a little too dark and sparse. The 2025 game in comparison features many more buildings surrounding the track itself, while the buildings themselves sport interior lighting and reflections, all of which is absent in that original game. The most obvious change over the years is really tied to this specifically, a gradual increase in background complexity, filling in more of the side areas, the stuff around the buildings rather than just the buildings themselves. That said, the cars themselves have looked pretty great all the way back in Tokyo Xtreme Racer 2, I would argue, though of course they have been improved significantly as well. The 2025 game of course also switches to physically based materials, bringing it up to modern standards, and supports frame rates above 60 FPS, which is great. One thing I did notice though is how the motion blur in the modern game produces a similar looking effect on the tarmac surface as the texture trick I mentioned in Shutokō Battle 01. Now, when compared against Xbox 360, I found the difference is actually a little more striking. The 360 version has an exceptionally of the era look to it that I didn't fully appreciate until comparing the two. The detail levels are certainly more comparable, but the lower 30 FPS and the rather hazy looking visuals really demonstrate how much better this new one can look, and how I kind of prefer the PS2 and Dreamcast era visuals to the Xbox 360 version. Lastly, however, I wanted to bring in this, a comparison with real life. I had a chance to film this while crossing the Rainbow Bridge myself here in Tokyo, and while the game is certainly missing things and does not perfectly capture this area, I was surprised at how close it actually gets. Like, it's recognizable in a way that generally was not possible in any of the prior entries. It feels a lot more realistic than I expected. And it's this defying of expectations perhaps that Genki has long specialized in. This scrappy little company has never had the resources to compete with the big boys in the industry, yet against the odds, they've managed to keep going somehow for decades even, while staying true to their roots. One can easily imagine a reboot of this series targeting more modern trends such as monetization, mass multiplayer, mobile focus, etc., but that's not what happened. The game is genuinely a fantastic tribute to the older games, while introducing all the quality of life improvements you would expect in a 2025 release. It feels like a perfect fusion between retro sensibilities and modern technology in a way that I absolutely love. What's wild about all this is that it's still technically in early access, so the entire game is not here, yet somehow it almost already feels like a complete game. But still, even if you're not ready to jump in just yet, I hope you've come to appreciate what the series as a whole has offered, and perhaps go back to one of the classic entries and give it another shot. If you like the idea of cruising along the Shutokō Expressway at midnight, electric tunes blasting over the radio, then this just might be the series for you.